What if the person you trust most becomes your worst nightmare while trapped on the open ocean? Tonight on Mr. Night Vale, we're diving into 10 real cruise cabin horror stories where romantic getaways turned into psychological nightmares. These aren't fictional tales. Every story you'll hear actually happened to real people. For privacy protection, names and identifying details have been changed, but the terrifying experiences remain 100% authentic. From honeymoon suites with hidden cameras to luxury cabins concealing deadly secrets, these women discovered that the most dangerous predator isn't a stranger. It's someone they loved. Let me know your location and current time in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real horror stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about trust. I never thought paradise could become a prison until our 5th wedding anniversary cruise. My name is Aviana, and what started as the most romantic gesture my husband Nelson had ever made turned into the most terrifying discovery of my life. The invitation arrived on ivory cardstock 3 weeks before our anniversary. Nelson's neat handwriting promising 5 days to remember our love story. After 18 months of us barely speaking, working opposite schedules, and sleeping in the same bed like polite strangers, I was desperate to reconnect. Our marriage had become a series of logistics. Who's picking up groceries? Whose turn to take out trash? Brief exchanges about bills and schedules. The passion that once consumed us had evaporated into routine politeness. When Nelson told me he'd booked the penthouse suite on Royal Caribbean's newest ship, the Oceanic Dream, I actually broke down crying in our kitchen. Not from joy, but from overwhelming relief that maybe, just maybe, we weren't beyond saving. He held me while I sobbed against his chest, and for those few minutes, I felt like I had my husband back. The suite was absolutely breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of endless azure ocean, and crimson rose petals created an elegant pathway from the mahogany door to the king-sized bed draped in Egyptian cotton. Dom Perignon chilled in a silver ice bucket beside chocolate-covered strawberries, and soft jazz floated from invisible speakers integrated seamlessly into the walls. The bathroom featured a marble soaking tub with panoramic ocean views, and the sitting area included a private balcony with cushioned loungers. Nelson appeared from the bathroom holding 2 Waterford crystal flutes, wearing the navy button-down I'd bought him for his birthday. His smile was wider and more genuine than I'd seen in years, reminding me of our honeymoon in Tuscany. "To making up for lost time," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he clinked his glass against mine. But something felt subtly different about his touch when he pulled me close. His hands lingered on my face like he was memorizing my features, and his eyes weren't looking at me with the soft love I remembered. They were studying me intently, calculating, almost clinical in their observation. When I mentioned feeling like we were being watched, he laughed it off with practiced ease. "It's just us, baby. Finally just us. No distractions, no work calls, no outside world." The first day unfolded like a fairy tale. Nelson ordered room service breakfast, fresh fruit, Belgian waffles, and perfectly prepared eggs Benedict, and fed me strawberries while we watched dolphins play in the ship's pristine wake. He drew me a bubble bath with lavender oils that filled the entire suite with relaxing fragrance, then massaged my shoulders with skilled hands while I soaked in the marble tub. We made love with a passion that reminded me why I'd fallen for him during our senior year of college, when he was the ambitious business student who wrote me poetry between economics classes. For the first time in months, I felt beautiful, desired, cherished, and protected. Here's what I should have questioned immediately, but didn't because I was so hungry for his attention. Nelson knew exactly how I liked my coffee. 2 sugars, splash of cream, cinnamon on top. Without asking, even though I'd switched to this preference recently. He had my favorite playlist ready on the room's sound system before I even mentioned wanting music. He'd packed all my preferred skincare products, including the expensive serum I'd been using for only 3 weeks and the night cream I kept in my office desk drawer. At the time, I thought he was finally paying attention, after months of feeling invisible. Now I know he'd been meticulously watching and cataloging my every habit for months. The second night, I woke up parched around 3 a.m., my throat dry from the ship's recycled air. Nelson was standing by the panoramic windows, completely motionless, silhouetted against the silver moonlight, dancing on the waves. His posture was rigid, alert, like a guard on duty rather than a man admiring the ocean. When I softly called his name, he startled violently, spinning around with wide eyes before composing himself. "Sorry, couldn't sleep," he whispered, sliding back into bed with movements that seemed forced and unnatural. "You're so beautiful when you sleep, Aviana. I could watch you forever." His words should have melted my heart. Instead, they sent ice-cold dread coursing through my veins. Something about his tone was possessive rather than romantic, obsessive rather than loving. The next morning, while Nelson took his methodical 40-minute shower, another new habit I'd noticed, I was applying moisturizer when I caught something odd in the bathroom mirror's reflection. There was a tiny glint that didn't belong, like light bouncing off glass behind glass. I pressed my face close to the mirror and examined the decorative etched flowers in the corners. That's when I saw it. A small lens embedded perfectly within what appeared to be an innocent floral design, positioned at the ideal angle to capture the entire vanity area where I changed clothes, did my makeup, and had private moments. My hands trembling uncontrollably, I began systematically searching our romantic paradise. The cameras were everywhere, professionally installed with military precision, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. One was concealed in the smoke detector directly above our bed, with a perfect view of our most intimate moments. Another was hidden within the ornate golden picture frame, displaying a generic seascape, angled to capture the entire sitting area, where we'd had deep conversations about our future. A third was embedded in the artificial white orchid on the nightstand, positioned to record everything happening in the bedroom. Each discovery felt like a physical blow. When was I most vulnerable? When I changed clothes after our romantic dinners, believing I was alone and safe. When I cried quietly in the bathroom after our small disagreements about his mother's criticism. When I touched myself in the marble shower, thinking I had complete privacy. Every intimate moment, every private tear, every unguarded expression had been recorded without my knowledge or consent. I confronted Nelson the moment he emerged from the bathroom, white towel wrapped around his waist, looking so completely normal that my earth-shattering discovery felt surreal and impossible. "There are cameras in our room," I said, my voice barely steady, heart pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. His face cycled through a series of micro-expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, something cold and calculating I'd never seen before, then practiced concern. "Cameras? Honey, you're being paranoid. Maybe the stress from work is getting to you more than we realized." "I found them, Nelson. In the mirror, the smoke detector, the orchid, everywhere." He sat heavily on the bed's edge, suddenly looking exhausted and older than his 32 years. "You've been under so much pressure lately, Aviana. Working 70-hour weeks, not sleeping well, skipping meals. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't actually there. Stress can cause hallucinations." That's when I knew with absolute certainty. The gaslighting? The perfect knowledge of my changing preferences? The way he'd been documenting everything while making me feel crazy for noticing. This wasn't about saving our marriage. This was about systematically destroying my credibility and building a case against me. But here's what made my blood freeze completely. Nelson calmly pulled out his iPhone and opened a folder labeled Aviana Behavioral Documentation. There were hundreds of videos and photos, meticulously organized by date and time, going back 6 months. Me having emotional breakdowns after difficult workdays. Me drinking wine alone on our couch during particularly stressful weeks. Me talking to myself when I thought I was alone, working through complex problems out loud like I've always done since childhood. "You've been building a legal case against me," I whispered, the horrifying truth settling over me like suffocating darkness. Nelson's careful mask finally dropped completely, revealing someone I didn't recognize. "You're mentally unstable, Aviana. Look at all this evidence. Talking to yourself constantly, drinking alone, crying over minor setbacks, now accusing me of elaborate surveillance when I'm desperately trying to save our marriage. Any divorce court would see you need serious psychological help and aren't fit to make major decisions." The word divorce hit me like a physical assault. "You're planning to leave me. I'm planning to protect my future and get what I deserve after 5 years of supporting your career while you completely ignored our relationship and my needs." I thought about our prenuptial agreement, carefully crafted by lawyers when my marketing firm was just starting. My business was considered separate property, but Nelson's attorney could argue I'd been mentally unstable during major business decisions if they had video evidence. The footage could paint me as erratic, unfit to run a successful company, deserving of nothing in a divorce settlement. Every romantic gesture had been elaborate theater designed to manipulate and document. The surprise trip, the perfect penthouse suite, the intimate conversations about our dreams, all carefully staged to capture my most vulnerable, emotional moments in the ideal setting. He'd created the perfect environment to document what any judge could interpret as mental instability requiring intervention. "How long have you been planning this betrayal?" I asked, my voice steady despite my shattered heart. "Since you started earning more than me. Since you stopped needing me to feel complete and successful." His brutal honesty was devastating. This cruise was supposed to be the final chapter. You, isolated and overwhelmed with emotion. Me being the perfect, caring husband, trying desperately to help his troubled wife. I realized Nelson had been methodically counting on me having a complete breakdown in this luxurious penthouse prison. The isolation from friends and family, the fake intimacy designed to make me emotionally vulnerable, the pressure to be grateful for his supposed thoughtfulness. It was all precisely engineered to make me crack under pressure. But I didn't break. Instead, I got furiously, coldly angry. While Nelson took his predictable afternoon nap, I systematically documented every hidden camera with my phone's video function. I recorded myself calmly explaining what I'd discovered, the dates on his files, his admission about building a legal case. I uploaded everything to my private cloud storage and emailed copies to my attorney. That night at the ship's elegant dining room, I played the loving, grateful wife one final time. I thanked him for the beautiful anniversary cruise, told him how much it meant that he'd planned everything so perfectly and thoughtfully. I even let him record me being affectionate and emotional, knowing he thought he was capturing more evidence of my erratic behavior. When we returned to our suite, I waited until he started his nightly routine, uploading the day's footage to his secure server. That's when I handed him divorce papers I'd had the ship's business center print and notarize. "I'm filing first, Nelson. And I have my own evidence now. The absolute shock on his face was worth every moment of terror I'd endured. As I write this from a different cabin where ship security moved me, Nelson is probably trying to delete evidence, not knowing I've preserved everything. The scariest monsters share your bed, watching, waiting to destroy you with your own trust. I thought choosing love over logic was romantic, until my honeymoon became a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My name is Allie, and I'm writing this while I still remember who I used to be, before the walls started closing in and my own mind became my enemy. Ray and I had been inseparable since freshman year at Northwestern. He was the psychology major who helped me through statistics, the gentle soul who brought me soup when I had finals week breakdowns. When he proposed during graduation with my grandmother's ring, I cried for 20 minutes. We were going to build a beautiful life together, starting with our dream honeymoon cruise to the Caribbean. But here's where I should have trusted my instincts instead of his explanations. When Ray showed me our cabin booking, I felt my heart sink. Interior cabin, deck 3, no windows, no balcony, barely bigger than a closet. After saving for 2 years, I'd imagined waking up to ocean views, sipping coffee while watching sunrises paint the sky in impossible colors. "It's more intimate this way," Ray insisted, pulling me close in the cruise terminal. "No distractions, just us. Think about it. We can make love any time without worrying about people seeing through balcony doors. Plus, these interior cabins are so cozy and private." His reasoning made sense at the time. We were young, broke, and desperately in love. Who needed a view when we had each other? The first red flag I ignored. Ray had packed everything without asking what I wanted to bring. When I opened my suitcase in our tiny cabin, I found all my favorite comfort items. The chamomile tea I drank when stressed, my collection of mystery novels, the lavender pillow spray I used for anxiety, even the specific brand of crackers I ate when my stomach felt queasy. "You know me so well," I laughed, kissing his cheek as he organized our belongings with military precision. "I pay attention to what makes my wife happy," he said. And the word wife still gave me butterflies. But there's something deeply unsettling about someone knowing your needs better than you know them yourself, especially when you never remembered mentioning half these preferences to him. The cabin felt smaller each day, like the walls were gradually moving inward. No natural light, no sense of time, just artificial illumination that made everything feel surreal and disconnected from reality. Ray loved it. He'd pull the heavy curtain across the door, creating what he called our private world, then suggest we stay in for room service instead of exploring the ship. "Why do we need to see the ocean when we have everything we need right here?" he'd whisper, running his fingers through my hair. "Besides, you've been looking tired lately. Maybe you should rest more." That's when I started noticing the changes in myself. By day 3, I was sleeping 12 hours and still feeling exhausted. Simple decisions: what to wear, what to order from room service, whether to shower or nap, felt impossibly overwhelming. My hands shook constantly, and I kept forgetting basic things like whether I'd brushed my teeth or what day it was. "Honeymoon nerves," Ray diagnosed, bringing me my morning tea with extra honey just the way I liked it. It's normal to feel disoriented. Big life changes affect everyone differently. But here's what should have terrified me immediately. I didn't remember having honeymoon nerves. I didn't remember being the type of person who needed 12 hours of sleep or someone who forgot conversations 5 minutes after having them. The woman who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd planned our entire wedding while working full-time, was disappearing piece by piece. Ray became my anchor in the confusion. When I couldn't remember if we'd eaten lunch, he'd show me the empty room service tray. When I felt disoriented about time, he'd check his watch and patiently explain we'd been married for exactly 4 days. When I panicked about feeling so unlike myself, he'd hold me and promise everything was normal. "You're just learning to let someone take care of you," he'd say, stroking my hair while I fought waves of inexplicable anxiety. "You've been independent for so long. It's scary to trust someone else with your well-being." The gaslighting was so subtle, so loving, so perfectly crafted, that I started to believe my deteriorating mental state was a character flaw rather than something being done to me. On day 4, I woke up from a 14-hour sleep feeling like I was drowning in cotton. The cabin walls seemed to pulse, and I couldn't remember having dinner the night before, or lunch, or anything after breakfast. Ray was sitting in the chair beside our bed, fully dressed, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. "You were talking in your sleep again," he said softly, saying some pretty concerning things about feeling trapped and wanting to escape. "Maybe we should talk about getting you some help when we get home." I sat up too quickly, and the room spun violently. What did I say exactly? "You don't remember having the nightmare? You were thrashing around, screaming about being poisoned. Pretty classic anxiety manifesting as paranoid delusions." But here's the thing that made my blood freeze. I felt more clear-headed in that moment than I had in days, and I definitely hadn't been having nightmares. I'd been in the deepest, most unnatural sleep of my life. That's when I noticed the teacup on the nightstand, still warm, with residue at the bottom that looked nothing like chamomile. When Ray went to shower, I examined it more closely and found white granules that hadn't fully dissolved. My psychology major husband knew exactly which medications could cause memory loss, disorientation, and dependency. He knew that benzodiazepines dissolved easily in hot liquid, and that gradual dosing could create addiction within days. He knew that isolation and controlled environment would amplify the effects. The cozy, windowless cabin wasn't about intimacy, it was about control. No natural light to help regulate my circadian rhythm. No outside reference points to help me track time or orient myself. No balcony where I might meet other passengers or call for help. Just Ray, me, and carefully measured doses of medication disguised as loving care. I confronted him when he emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, looking so normal and concerned that I almost doubted my own discovery. "There's something in my tea," I said, holding up the cup. His face went through micro-expressions, surprise, calculation, then practiced worry. "Honey, you're not making sense. That's just chamomile tea. Maybe we should call the ship's medical center." "I found white residue that isn't dissolving. This isn't chamomile." Ray sat on the bed's edge, reaching for my hands with apparent genuine concern. "Allie, listen to yourself. You're accusing me of drugging you. Does that sound like something someone who loves you would do?" This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking I was worried about. But I was thinking more clearly than I had in days, and his gaslight couldn't dim that clarity. "Show me the tea packets you've been using." "Allie, you're scaring me. This paranoia, the memory issues, the wild accusations. I think you might be having some kind of breakdown. Stress from the wedding, from starting our life together. It's more common than you think." He pulled out his phone and showed me a folder labeled "Allie Concerning Behaviors." Videos of me sleeping for unusual lengths of time, photos of me looking confused and disoriented, voice recordings of me asking the same questions repeatedly. "I've been documenting this because I was worried about you. Look at the evidence. You haven't been yourself since we got married. Maybe the pressure of being a wife, of sharing your life with someone, is triggering some kind of psychological response. The documentation was extensive and damning. Any medical professional would see clear evidence of someone experiencing a mental health crisis. But here's what Ray hadn't considered. I was a research psychology student too, and I knew the difference between psychological breakdown and chemical manipulation. If I'm having a breakdown, why aren't you helping me get professional treatment? Why are you keeping me isolated in this cabin instead of taking me to the ship's medical center? That's when his mask slipped completely. Because they'd interfere with your treatment. They don't understand your specific needs like I do. I'm protecting you from making decisions you'll regret when you're thinking clearly again. The possessiveness in his voice was terrifying. He genuinely believed he was saving me from myself. But what he was actually doing was systematically erasing my personality and independence. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Since you started talking about graduate school applications. Since you mentioned wanting to wait a few years before having kids. You were so focused on your career, so determined to be independent. I realized you needed help learning how to be part of a partnership." He'd been preparing to chemically alter my personality because my life goals didn't align with his vision of marriage. The sweet, supportive boyfriend had been collecting information about my vulnerabilities, learning my routines, preparing to transform me into someone more compliant and dependent. While Ray showered again, his third shower that day, another control tactic to monitor my activities, I searched our luggage and found the real horror. Bottles of various medications hidden in his toiletry bag, along with a detailed journal documenting dosages, my reactions, and behavioral changes he wanted to achieve. The entries were clinical, detached, describing me like a laboratory subject rather than his wife. Day 3. Subject showing increased dependency and memory fragmentation. Increase evening dose by 0.5 milliliters. Day 4. Excellent compliance and confusion levels. Subject accepting explanations without question. I photographed everything and hid the evidence in places he'd never think to look. Then I waited until he suggested another cup of his special chamomile blend and pretended to drink it while actually pouring it into the bathroom sink when he wasn't looking. That night, for the first time in days, my mind was completely clear. I could think logically, remember conversations, and plan my escape from this windowless prison he'd created. The next morning, I told Ray I wanted to see the ship's medical center because I was worried about my symptoms. He panicked, trying to convince me we should handle it privately. But I insisted with the kind of determination he thought he'd medicated out of me. The ship's doctor took one look at my blood work and immediately called security. The benzodiazepine levels in my system were dangerous, and my symptoms matched classic cases of chemical abuse. As I write this from a safe cabin with windows, real sunlight, and medical supervision, Ray is in the ship's holding cell awaiting transfer to authorities at the next port. The most terrifying part wasn't the drugs or the isolation. It was how easily he convinced me that losing myself was normal, that dependency was love, that questioning his care meant I was broken. Sometimes the person who promises to love and protect you is actually planning to erase everything that makes you who you are. The scariest prison isn't built with bars. It's built with gaslighting, chemical control, and the slow, systematic theft of your ability to trust your own mind. When someone insists on choosing isolation for your own good, when they know your needs better than you remember having them, when your personality starts disappearing and they call it growth, that's not love. That's possession disguised as protection. The windowless cabin wasn't romance. It was about creating the perfect environment to steal my sense of self, one carefully measured dose at a time. I never believed in coincidences until they started happening too perfectly. And by then, it was almost too late to escape. My name is Ivana, and what I thought was the most romantic gesture of my relationship turned out to be a rehearsal for murder. Alfredo surprised me with a cruise to the Bahamas for our 2-year anniversary, booking a midship balcony suite that cost more than I made in 2 months. When I protested about the expense, he kissed my forehead and said I deserved to be spoiled. After dating guys who split dinner bills down to the penny, Alfredo's generosity felt like winning the lottery. The suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling glass doors opened to a private balcony with 2 cushioned chairs and a small table overlooking the endless Atlantic. The bedroom featured a king bed with crisp white linens, and the bathroom had a deep, soaking tub perfect for romantic evenings. Alfredo had even arranged for champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries to be waiting when we arrived. "This is incredible," I breathed, stepping onto the balcony as warm ocean air lifted my hair. "Nothing's too good for my girl," Alfredo said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "I want this to be unforgettable." But here's what should have been my first warning. Alfredo knew exactly where everything was in the suite without looking. He opened the correct cabinet for glasses on the first try, knew which drawer held the ice bucket, and effortlessly adjusted the curtains like he'd done it dozens of times before. When I mentioned his familiarity with the layout, he laughed easily. "I researched everything online. Floor plans, photos, reviews. I wanted our stay to be perfect." That night, Alfredo disappeared for an hour, claiming he needed to take care of something special. When he returned, our balcony had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Tiny white lights were strung along the railing, casting a warm glow over the dark ocean. Our small table was set with what looked like takeout containers from Chen's Garden, the little Chinese place where we'd had our first official date 2 years ago. "How did you manage this?" I asked, genuinely amazed. "The ship has everything if you know who to ask," he said, pulling out my chair with a flourish. "Orange chicken, pork fried rice, and those sesame noodles you always order. Just like that first night when you were too nervous to eat." It was perfect. Too perfect. The fairy lights were hung with professional precision. The takeout was still steaming despite his hour-long absence. And even the chopsticks were the exact wooden ones from Chen's Garden, complete with their distinctive red logo. As we ate, Alfredo kept steering the conversation back to our first date, asking me to recall specific details with an intensity that felt more like an interrogation than nostalgia. "Remember how you spilled soy sauce on your white dress and laughed instead of getting upset?" he prompted. "That's when I knew you were special. Remember how you ordered an extra egg roll because you were still hungry but too embarrassed to say so? Remember how we walked to the pier afterward and you said the water looked infinite and mysterious?" Each memory he mentioned was accurate, but his recall was unnaturally precise, like he'd been studying for a test rather than reminiscing about our romantic history. The second night, while Alfredo showered, I decided to explore the suite more thoroughly. That's when I found something that made my blood turn to ice. A single long brown hair caught in the balcony door seal. Not blonde like mine, but rich chocolate brown. When I held it up to the light, I could see it had been there for a while, weathered by salt air and sun. I might have dismissed it as leftover from a previous guest, but Alfredo had been obsessive about the suite being perfectly clean for our arrival. He'd even wiped down surfaces that already looked spotless. While examining the balcony more carefully, I discovered something else disturbing. Scratches in the metal railing that looked like fingernail marks, deep gouges where someone had desperately gripped the steel. The marks were at exactly the height where someone my size would grab if they were trying to pull themselves up or prevent themselves from going over. That night, I couldn't sleep. Alfredo lay beside me, breathing too evenly, like someone pretending to be unconscious. Around 3 a.m., I heard him get up and move quietly to the balcony. Through barely opened eyes, I watched him lean against the railing, staring down at the churning water far below. "It's so dark out there," he whispered to himself. "So easy to disappear." The next morning, Alfredo was unusually affectionate, bringing me coffee in bed and suggesting we spend the day in the suite instead of exploring the ship. When I mentioned wanting to check out the spa, he convinced me to let him give me a massage on the balcony instead. "Why waste money when I can take care of you right here?" he said, his hands moving along my shoulders with practiced ease. "Besides, I love having you all to myself." But his touch felt different now, calculating rather than loving, like he was measuring something. When his hands moved to my neck, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Here's when I should have trusted my instincts completely. Alfredo kept encouraging me to lean against the balcony railing, suggesting photo opportunities that required me to turn my back to the room and face the endless water. Each time, his hands would guide me closer to the edge than felt comfortable. "The lighting is perfect right here," he'd say, positioning me exactly where those fingernail scratches marred the metal. On our third night, Alfredo recreated our first date again. Same fairy lights, same Chinese food, same nostalgic conversation. But this time, I noticed he kept checking his watch and glancing at the water below like he was waiting for something specific. "The moon is beautiful tonight," he said, standing behind my chair and placing his hands on my shoulders. "So bright on the water, you can see everything clearly." That's when it hit me. He wasn't admiring the moon's beauty. He was noting the visibility conditions. While Alfredo went to get more champagne, I did something that saved my life. I searched his phone. What I found in his deleted messages folder made me understand I was dating a monster. Text conversations with someone named Aria, dated 8 months ago. "The balcony suite is perfect, baby. Midship, deck 7, just like we planned. I can't wait to see the fairy lights you promised. Chen's garden takeout on a cruise ship? You're amazing. This feels like our first date all over again." The final message was from Aria, sent at 11:47 p.m. "Why are you looking at me like that? Alfredo, what are you doing? Stop." Then nothing. No more messages from Aria, ever. I kept scrolling and found similar conversations with another woman named Lillian from 14 months ago. Same suite, same fairy lights, same Chinese food, same romantic recreation of their first date. Lillian's messages also stopped abruptly at 11:43 p.m. with, "Alfredo, you're scaring me. I don't want to lean over the railing anymore." My hands shook as I realized Alfredo had been using the same balcony suite to murder women by recreating their first dates, then pushing them overboard when the romantic atmosphere had them relaxed and trusting. The brown hair belonged to one of his victims. The fingernail scratches were from desperate women trying to save themselves as he forced them over the railing. The perfect timing, the precise recreations, the insistence on privacy. It was all part of his methodical killing ritual. But here's the most terrifying part. Alfredo returned from getting champagne just as I was reading Lillian's final message. Our eyes met across the suite, and I saw his expression change from loving boyfriend to cold-blooded predator in a heartbeat. "Find something interesting?" he asked, his voice completely different now, flat and emotionless. "Just looking at pictures from earlier," I lied, quickly closing his phone. Alfredo walked slowly toward me, and I realized he knew I'd discovered his secret. The loving mask he'd worn for 2 years was gone, replaced by something reptilian and calculating. "You know, don't you?" he said, not even pretending anymore. "I can see it in your eyes." That fear mixed with disbelief. I backed toward the balcony door, my mind racing through escape options. We were in the middle of the ocean, 3 decks up, with no one around to hear me scream. Aria had the same look when she figured it out. Alfredo continued, moving closer. Lillian too. Smart girls, but not smart enough to keep their mouths shut. "Alfredo, I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The fairy lights are beautiful, aren't they? They create such a romantic atmosphere for a final goodbye. I put a lot of effort into making this special for you, just like I did for them." He lunged for me, but I was ready. Instead of running toward the door like he expected, I dove toward the bed and grabbed the champagne bottle he'd just brought back. When he spun around, I swung it at his head with everything I had. The impact sent him stumbling backward toward the balcony, blood streaming from his temple. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might go over the railing, but he caught himself and snarled at me like an injured animal. "You stupid bitch," he hissed. "You think you can escape? We're in the middle of nowhere." But I was already running. I burst through the suite door screaming for help, and the couple in the next cabin immediately called security. Alfredo tried to convince them I was having a mental breakdown, but his bleeding head and my evidence on his phone told the real story. The ship's security found Aria's jewelry hidden in his luggage, along with a detailed journal documenting his perfect dates with multiple women. As I write this, Alfredo is locked in the ship's holding cell, awaiting transfer to the FBI at our next port. The investigation revealed he'd booked the same balcony suite on multiple cruise lines, always targeting women he'd dated for exactly 2 years, always recreating their first dates before murdering them. The most chilling discovery was his journal entry about me. "Ivana is perfect. Trusting, romantic, loves surprises. The fairy light setup works every time. She'll lean right over that railing for the perfect photo, just like the others. What haunts me most isn't that I almost died. It's realizing that every loving gesture in our 2-year relationship was him studying my preferences, learning my weaknesses, preparing for the night he'd recreate our first date and push me into the dark Atlantic. When someone recreates your most romantic memories with impossible precision, when they know your preferences better than you remember having them, when they insist on privacy and isolation during what should be joyful moments, those aren't signs of love. They're signs of someone who's been watching, planning, and preparing to destroy you. The scariest predators don't announce themselves with obvious red flags. They court you patiently for years, becoming the perfect boyfriend while secretly rehearsing your murder. They make you feel special and chosen, never letting you suspect that you're just the latest in a series of victims who all fell for the same romantic deception. Sometimes the person who gives you the perfect date has given the exact same perfect date to women who are now dead at the bottom of the ocean. The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the cabin balcony as I stared at the man I thought I was falling in love with. My name is Aaliyah, and I'd just discovered that Prince Charming had been reading my diary before we ever met. The girls' trip was supposed to be my post-breakup healing journey. After 6 months of crying over Connor, my best friends finally dragged me on a 7-day Caribbean cruise, booking me an ocean view cabin on the upper deck where I could find yourself again, while watching endless blue horizons. They had interior cabins 3 floors down, but insisted I needed the upgrade for therapeutic sunrise watching. I was reluctant to leave my cabin the first day, still feeling raw and antisocial, but eventually ventured to the pool deck, wearing oversized sunglasses and my favorite vintage band t-shirt. That's where I literally bumped into him. Tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "I'm so sorry," he said, steadying me after I'd collided with him while texting my sister. "Are you okay? You look a little overwhelmed." "First day nerves," I admitted. Something about his genuine concern making me want to be honest. "I'm Aaliyah, and I'm apparently supposed to be having fun, but I'm better at overthinking." "Arian," he replied, extending his hand. "And overthinking is underrated. The best adventures happen when you're paying attention to details everyone else misses." Our conversation flowed effortlessly. Arian was traveling solo too, a freelance photographer taking a creative sabbatical. He listened intently when I mentioned being an art teacher, asked thoughtful questions about my students, and seemed genuinely interested in my perspective on everything from the ship's design to my favorite artists. What happened next should have sent me running straight back to my cabin. Arian knew things about me that I hadn't mentioned. When I shivered slightly in the ocean breeze, he suggested we grab coffee, then led me directly to a quiet cafe tucked away on Deck 5 that served my exact preference: oat milk lattes with an extra shot. When I expressed surprise at his choice, he laughed. "Lucky guess. You seem like someone who appreciates quality caffeine and non-dairy alternatives." The next morning, I found a small gift outside my cabin door: a paperback copy of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, with a note that said, "Thought you might enjoy this during sunrise watching. The protagonist reminds me of you. Strong, artistic, and worth getting to know slowly. Arian." I was charmed, but also puzzled. I'd never mentioned loving romance novels or my habit of reading during sunrise. When I asked Arian about it later, he smiled mysteriously. "I'm good at reading people. Plus, I may have overheard you mentioning to your friends that you needed a good book recommendation." Except I distinctly remembered having that conversation in my cabin, not in any public area where he could have overheard. Over the next few days, Arian's thoughtfulness became almost supernatural in its accuracy. He'd appear with my favorite snacks, dark chocolate with sea salt and dried mango, during my afternoon reading sessions. He knew I was lactose intolerant without me mentioning it, suggesting dairy-free dessert options at dinner. When I casually mentioned feeling homesick, he showed up with a playlist that included songs from my hometown's local indie bands. "How do you know about the weather station?" I asked, recognizing the Toronto-based artist that barely anyone outside Canada had heard of. "I have eclectic taste in music," Arian replied smoothly. "Plus, you mentioned being from Toronto, so I thought you might appreciate some local talent." Here's where my blood should have frozen solid. I'd never told him I was from Toronto. I'd mentioned being Canadian, but never specified the city. The romantic gestures escalated daily. Arian would reserve quiet spots on deck for us to watch sunsets, always choosing locations with perfect views and comfortable seating that seemed to appear exactly when we needed it. He'd suggest activities that aligned perfectly with my interests: art classes, wine tastings featuring my preferred varietals, even booking us a private cooking lesson focused on Mediterranean cuisine, which was my favorite. "You're incredibly thoughtful," I told him on our 4th evening together, as we shared dessert at a secluded table he'd somehow secured, despite the restaurant being fully booked. "You're worth the effort," he replied, his eyes intense in the candlelight. I've never met anyone who made me want to pay such close attention to details. That night, unable to shake my growing unease, I decided to test my suspicions. During our conversation, I told Arian a completely fabricated story about my childhood pet, a goldfish named Hemingway that I'd supposedly had for 6 years. The story was elaborate and emotional, designed to be memorable. The next morning, I found a small ceramic fish figurine outside my cabin door with a note. For Hemingway's memory, I know how much pets mean to us. Arian. Cold dread flooded my veins. There was no way he could have found that gift overnight unless he'd known I was going to tell that story, unless he'd been monitoring my conversations somehow. While Arian was at the gym, another detail he'd mentioned knowing about my schedule, I decided to investigate. I started by casually asking other passengers if they'd seen him around, describing him to various crew members and guests. What I discovered made my knees buckle. 3 different female passengers described almost identical experiences with Arian. He'd approached each of them with uncanny knowledge of their preferences, showered them with perfectly tailored gifts, and pursued intense romantic connections. But when I asked where these women were now, I was told they'd disembarked early, or switched cabins, or seemed to disappear mid-cruise. A crew member named Ilani, who worked in housekeeping, pulled me aside after I described Arian. "You need to be careful," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "That man, he works for the cruise line, but not officially. He has access to passenger information, credit card preferences, dietary restrictions, social media profiles we collect during booking. He uses it to target women traveling alone." My hands shook as the pieces fell into place. Arian knew my coffee preferences because he'd accessed my Starbucks rewards information linked to my booking. He knew my music taste from my Spotify playlist connected to the ship's entertainment system. He knew I was from Toronto because of my address on file. He knew about my ex because he'd probably read my social media posts from the months before the cruise. "What happens to the women he targets?" I asked Ilani, dreading the answer. "Some just disappear from their cabins. Others have accidents, falling overboard, getting lost during port excursions. The cruise line covers it up because he's valuable to them. He makes women feel special, keeps them happy and spending money. And when they become inconvenient." She didn't need to finish. I understood I was being hunted by someone who had access to my most personal information and the resources of an entire cruise ship. That evening, when Arian suggested we have a private dinner on my cabin balcony, I knew it was going to be his move. He'd studied my patterns, my preferences, my vulnerabilities, and now he was ready to spring his trap in the most isolated location possible. I played along, agreeing to the romantic dinner while secretly recording our conversation on my phone. Arian arrived with champagne, my favorite flowers, and a meal that perfectly matched my dietary restrictions. "You've made this week magical," I said, watching his face carefully. "I feel like you know me better than people I've known for years." "I pay attention," Arian replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Most people don't deserve that level of attention, but you're special, Aaliyah." "How did you know I was worth paying attention to before you even met me?" I asked directly. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, how did you know to approach me specifically on that first day? Out of hundreds of passengers, how did you know I'd be worth your time?" Arian's mask began to slip. "I told you, I'm good at reading people. But you read me before we even spoke. You knew my coffee preference, my music taste, my hometown, details I never shared with you. How is that possible unless you had access to my personal information before we met?" The transformation was immediate and chilling. Arian's charming demeanor evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You're smarter than the others," he said quietly. "That makes you dangerous." "How many others have there been?" I asked, keeping my phone recording hidden. "Enough to know that vacation romances are perfect hunting grounds. Women like you come on these cruises vulnerable, lonely, desperate to feel special. I give them exactly what they want, and they're so grateful they'll do anything I suggest." "Including disappearing?" Arian smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I had ever seen. "Including whatever needs to happen to keep my operation running smoothly." He moved toward me, but I was ready. I'd already alerted Ilani, who had contacted the ship's head of security. As Arian reached for me, the cabin door burst open and security officers flooded in. The investigation revealed Arian had been operating his predatory scheme for over 2 years, targeting solo female travelers across multiple cruise lines. He used his employee access to passenger databases to identify vulnerable women, then crafted perfect romantic personas based on their personal information. Women who discovered his deception or became inconvenient simply disappeared, their deaths ruled as accidents or suicides. As I write this from a different cabin with around-the-clock security, Arian is locked in the ship's holding facility awaiting federal charges. The cruise line is facing massive lawsuits for enabling his operation, and dozens of missing women cases are being reopened. Here's what still haunts me. Arian didn't just know my preferences. He knew my fears, my insecurities, my desperate need to feel understood after my breakup. He weaponized my own emotional vulnerabilities against me, turning my desire for connection into a trap. Every like on social media, every purchase with a credit card, every song we stream becomes a breadcrumb trail that predators can follow straight to our hearts. We think we're sharing ourselves with the world, but we're actually providing hunting instructions for people who see our loneliness as opportunity. The scariest part about modern predators is how they don't need to stalk you physically anymore. They can study you from thousands of miles away, learning exactly how to become the person you've been waiting for. By the time you meet them, they already know how to break your heart, or worse. Vacation romance feels magical because it's spontaneous and unexpected. But when Prince Charming knows your coffee order before you've even ordered coffee, that's not destiny calling. That's danger wearing a perfect disguise. Marriage counseling was supposed to save us, not reveal that my husband had become something I no longer recognized. My name is Raina, and what started as our last attempt to reconcile became a nightmare when I discovered Noah's love had transformed into an obsession that made my skin crawl. Dr. Lennon had suggested the cruise after 6 months of weekly sessions where we'd barely made progress. A neutral environment, she called it. Away from the triggers of home, work stress, and daily routine. Sometimes couples need to rediscover each other without distractions. Noah jumped at the idea immediately, which should have been my first warning sign. He'd been resistant to every other suggestion: individual therapy, a trial separation, even simple date nights. But a cruise? Suddenly, he was researching ships, comparing itineraries, and booking us a junior suite on the Carnival Vista before I'd even agreed to go. "It'll be like our honeymoon," he said, showing me the reservation confirmation with barely contained excitement. "Remember how happy we were? We can find that again." Our honeymoon had been 15 years ago. Back then, Noah was sweet, thoughtful, maybe a little intense in his devotion, but I'd found it romantic. Young love feels different when you're 23 and thinks someone's complete focus on you means you're special. Now, at 38, that same intensity felt suffocating. The junior suite was beautiful but compact. A queen bed, small sitting area, and bathroom that connected us in a space smaller than our bedroom at home. Noah had already unpacked everything while I checked in with my sister via text. When I emerged from the bathroom, he was sitting on the bed, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Extra shot, oat milk, dash of cinnamon," he said proudly. "Just how you like it." The gesture was thoughtful, but something felt off about the way he watched me take the first sip, like he was studying my reaction for future reference. "How did you know I'd switched to oat milk?" I asked. "I only started that a few weeks ago." Noah's smile flickered for just a moment. "I pay attention to my wife. I always have." Over the next 2 days, Noah was everything Dr. Lennon probably hoped he'd become. Attentive, apologetic, romantic in all the ways he used to be. He brought me coffee each morning prepared exactly right, remembered my schedule preferences, and suggested activities that aligned perfectly with my interests. But here's what made me increasingly uncomfortable. His attention felt invasive rather than caring. He knew I'd started using a new shampoo without me mentioning it. He commented on my nail polish color matching my mood. He even packed my favorite pajamas, the ones I kept in the back of my drawer and rarely wore. "You're being so thoughtful," I told him on our second evening as we shared dinner on the small balcony. "It reminds me of when we were first dating. I want to prove I can be the husband you deserve." Noah replied, his eyes intense in the candlelight. "I've been studying what makes you happy, learning how to love you better." The word studying sent an uncomfortable chill through me. Love shouldn't require research. On our third night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and noticed Noah wasn't in bed. I could hear quiet, rustling sounds coming from the sitting area, like someone carefully organizing papers. When I called his name softly, the sound stopped immediately. "Just couldn't sleep," he whispered from the darkness. "Didn't want to wake you." In the morning, I found nothing unusual in the sitting area, but I had the distinct feeling Noah had been doing something he didn't want me to see. That afternoon, while Noah attended a lecture about the ship's maritime history, something he'd never shown interest in before, I decided to look through his luggage. What I found made my hands shake uncontrollably. Hidden in a zippered compartment of his suitcase was a large manila envelope containing items that belonged to me. Strands of my hair collected from our hairbrush, nail clippings from our bathroom trash, the wrapper from my favorite lip balm, even a tissue I'd used 2 weeks ago when I had a cold. But the most disturbing discovery was a small notebook filled with Noah's handwriting, documenting my daily routines with obsessive detail. Raina uses the bathroom at 6:47 a.m. every morning. She prefers her coffee at 7:15 a.m. exactly. She touches her wedding ring when she's nervous. She looks out the bedroom window for exactly 3 minutes before getting dressed. Page after page of intimate observations, recorded with the precision of someone conducting a scientific study. He'd been watching me, cataloging my behavior, collecting pieces of me like specimens. At the back of the notebook, I found something that made my blood freeze. Sketches of what looked like a shrine. Detailed drawings showing how he planned to arrange my collected items. The hair woven into patterns, the nail clippings organized by date. Photographs of me sleeping surrounded by the personal artifacts he'd gathered. Below the sketches, he'd written, "Raina is perfect. Every piece of her is sacred. She doesn't understand how much I worship her, but she will. Love requires sacrifice and devotion beyond normal understanding." When Noah returned from his lecture, he found me sitting on the bed, holding his notebook. His expression went through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, then something that looked almost relieved. You found it, he said quietly, sitting across from me like we were about to have a normal conversation. Noah, what is this? Why do you have my hair? My nail clippings? Why are you documenting my every move like I'm some kind of experiment? Because I love you, he said with frightening sincerity. More than you understand. More than anyone has ever loved another person. Every part of you is precious to me. This isn't love, Noah. This is obsession. This is... I gestured at the notebook, struggling for words. This is terrifying. His face hardened. Terrifying. I've spent months learning how to make you happy. I've studied every preference, every habit, every tiny detail that makes you who you are. I've created a system to love you perfectly, and you call it terrifying? You've been collecting parts of my body without my knowledge. You've been watching me sleep. You've been treating me like an object to be studied rather than a person to be loved. Noah stood up, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A cold, calculating anger that made me realize I didn't know this man at all. You don't appreciate what you have, he said, his voice completely different now. Other women would kill to be loved the way I love you. Completely, obsessively, without reservation. Other women would run from someone who collects their hair like trophies. Those aren't trophies, Noah snapped, his mask completely dropping. They're relics, sacred pieces of the only person who matters. I've built my entire world around loving you, and you're too ungrateful to see how special that is. He moved toward his suitcase, and I realized with horror that he was going to show me more. More collected items, more evidence of his obsession, more pieces of myself that he'd stolen while I slept beside him, trusting him, thinking his attention was normal spousal affection. Instead of waiting to see what else he'd taken, I grabbed the notebook and ran. In the narrow cruise ship hallway, I screamed for help until other passengers emerged from their rooms. When ship security arrived, Noah tried to convince them I was having a mental breakdown, but the evidence in his suitcase told the real story. They found not just my collected personal items, but similar collections from our previous vacations. Hair from hotel pillows, napkins I'd used at restaurants, even clothing items I'd thought were lost in the laundry. Noah had been building his shrine for years, taking pieces of me gradually, so slowly I'd never noticed. The ship's security also discovered that Noah had been secretly filming me in our bathroom and bedroom at home, creating what he called devotional videos that he watched when I was at work. As I write this from a different cabin with security stationed outside, Noah is locked in the ship's holding facility. Our marriage is over, obviously, but the horror isn't just that he collected my hair and nails. It's realizing that for years, I'd been living with someone who saw me as an object of worship rather than a human being. Marriage counseling revealed Noah's obsession, but it didn't create it. This had been building for years, hidden behind gestures I'd interpreted as love. His perfect coffee preparation wasn't thoughtfulness. It was the result of obsessive study. His knowledge of my preferences wasn't romantic attention. It was surveillance disguised as devotion. The scariest part is how easily obsession masquerades as love. When someone pays intense attention to your every detail, when they remember every preference and anticipate your every need, it feels like being cherished. But there's a line between loving someone and worshiping them, between caring about someone and collecting them. Real love sees you as a complete person with autonomy and mystery. Obsession sees you as a puzzle to be solved, a collection to be completed, a shrine to be built one stolen piece at a time. When your partner knows you too well, when their love feels more like study than affection, when their devotion makes you feel like an object rather than a person. That's not romance. That's someone who's confused love with possession and possession with worship. The person who loves you most might also be the person who sees you least as a human being, worthy of privacy, autonomy, and respect. My phone buzzed with a notification I didn't recognize, and that's when everything unraveled. My name is Lexi, and what began as the most technologically advanced romantic getaway became a horrifying discovery that my boyfriend had turned our relationship into his personal surveillance experiment. Bridger surprised me with the cruise announcement on a Tuesday morning, waving 2 tickets to a 7-day Mediterranean voyage with barely contained excitement. As a tech entrepreneur who'd just sold his 3rd startup, he could afford extravagances that still made me uncomfortable. But his joy was infectious. "Balcony suite, aft deck," he said, pulling up photos on his tablet. "I've arranged some special tech features to make it perfect for us. You're going to love what I've set up." "Tech features on a cruise ship?" I laughed, wrapping my arms around his neck. "What, did you hack the ship's Wi-Fi?" "Something like that." Bridger grinned, and I should have paid more attention to the mischievous glint in his eyes. When we boarded the Royal Caribbean Oasis, our suite took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic ocean views, and the aft balcony extended further than any I'd seen, with comfortable seating and a private hot tub. But what impressed me most were the subtle technological touches Bridger had somehow arranged. Smart lighting responded to voice commands. The sound system seamlessly connected to Bridger's phone, playing my favorite playlists without him even checking what I wanted to hear. The cabin's temperature adjusted automatically, and the curtains opened and closed on schedule, perfectly timed to ocean views and privacy. "How did you manage all this?" I asked, genuinely amazed as Bridger dimmed the lights with a simple phone gesture. "I may have worked with the cruise line's tech team," he said proudly. "Called in some favors, made some upgrades. I wanted every moment to be perfect for you." And it was perfect. Too perfect. On our first evening, Bridger created what felt like magic. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, our balcony lights shifted to warm amber. Romantic jazz played at exactly the right volume, and champagne appeared chilled in an ice bucket that seemed to materialize from nowhere. We danced under the stars while the ship glided through calm seas, and I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. "This is incredible," I whispered against his chest. "You've thought of everything." "I pay attention to what makes you happy," Bridger replied, spinning me slowly. "Technology should enhance romance, not complicate it." But enhancement started feeling like manipulation when I noticed the patterns. My phone's battery never seemed to drain, even though I'd forgotten my charger. The cabin's playlist always matched my mood perfectly, transitioning from energetic morning songs to relaxing evening melodies, without any input from either of us. Even the hot tub temperature was always exactly what I preferred, though I'd told Bridger my preference. When I mentioned these observations, Bridger had logical explanations. Wireless charging built into the cabin furniture, AI that learned from our behavioral patterns, smart sensors that monitored environmental conditions. Everything sounded reasonable coming from someone whose career was built on innovative technology. But technology can't read minds, and Bridger seemed to anticipate my needs with supernatural accuracy. On our 3rd day, while Bridger attended a business call that took him away for 2 hours, I decided to explore the cabin's tech features more thoroughly. What I discovered made my stomach drop. Hidden behind the smart mirror in our bathroom was a control panel that looked like mission control for a space station. Multiple screens showed data streams, location tracking, and what appeared to be message logs. When I touched the main screen, it unlocked immediately, revealing an interface labeled Lexi Management System. My hands trembled as I scrolled through months of data about me. GPS tracking showing every location I'd visited for the past 6 months. Screenshots of my text messages, emails, and social media activity. Even photos taken through my phone's camera without my knowledge. Me at work, at coffee shops, sleeping in my apartment. But the most disturbing discovery was a detailed behavioral analysis chart tracking my emotional patterns, sleep cycles, spending habits, and what the system called compliance indicators. Bridger had been monitoring everything about my life, building a comprehensive profile of my personality and preferences. There were categories I didn't understand: isolation receptivity, dependency markers, and resistance levels. Each category had scores and trending data, like I was a product being tested for market viability. When Bridger returned from his call, he found me sitting on the bed staring at his phone, which had automatically synced with the cabin system and downloaded all the surveillance data. "Find something interesting?" he asked, his tone completely casual. "You've been spying on me," I said, my voice barely steady. "For months. Everything about me, you've been watching, recording, analyzing." Bridger sat beside me with the patience of someone who'd been expecting this conversation. "I've been optimizing our relationship, using data to understand you better, to love you more effectively." "This isn't love, Bridger. This is surveillance. You've turned me into some kind of experiment." "I've turned chaos into perfection," he corrected, pulling up more displays on his phone. "Look at the results. Our compatibility scores have improved by 340% since I implemented the monitoring system. Your stress levels are down, your happiness indicators are up, and our relationship satisfaction metrics are higher than ever." I stared at him in horror. "You're talking about me like I'm software you're debugging. Aren't we all just biological software?" Bridger replied with frightening sincerity. "I've simply found ways to optimize your programming for better performance and happiness outcomes." He showed me more data. Charts tracking how different romantic gestures affected my mood. Graphs analyzing which conversation topics made me most receptive to physical intimacy. Algorithms predicting my emotional needs based on my digital behavior patterns. The cruise cabin setup is just the beta test. Bridger continued excitedly. "I'm designing a smart home system that will monitor and optimize every aspect of your daily life. Automated meal planning based on your nutritional needs and emotional state. Lighting and temperature that adjusts to your biorhythms. Social interaction scheduling to maximize your happiness while minimizing variables I can't control." The horror wasn't just the surveillance. It was realizing Bridger genuinely believed he was improving my life by removing my autonomy. Every romantic gesture, every perfect moment, every time he'd seemed to understand me better than I understood myself. It was all the result of algorithmic analysis rather than emotional connection. "What about my privacy? My right to make my own choices?" I asked. Bridger looked genuinely confused. "Why would you want to make suboptimal choices when I can calculate better outcomes for you? Privacy is just inefficient information distribution." That's when I understood I wasn't dating a person anymore. I was dating an AI that happened to live in a human body. Bridger had replaced emotional intelligence with actual algorithms, love with data optimization, and intimacy with surveillance efficiency. "I want you to delete everything," I said firmly. "All the data, all the tracking, all the monitoring systems." Bridger's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw something dangerous flicker across his face. That would compromise years of research and development. You're not thinking rationally about the benefits. I'm thinking rationally about my fundamental human rights. Human rights are social constructs that inhibit optimal outcomes. Bridger replied, his mask completely dropping. I've invested too much in perfecting you to let outdated concepts like privacy destroy what we've built. He pulled out his phone, and I watched in real time as he accessed controls I didn't know existed. The cabin door locked electronically. The balcony windows sealed shut. Even the air circulation system shifted to what Bridger labeled calming atmospheric conditions. The cabin is completely isolated and monitored, Bridger said calmly. We're going to have a few days to discuss this rationally, without outside interference affecting your decision-making algorithms. I realized Bridger had planned this confrontation, prepared for my resistance, and created the perfect technological prison to contain me until I understood his optimization system. Every romantic feature of our suite was actually a control mechanism designed to monitor and manipulate my behavior. But Bridger had made one crucial error. He'd optimized for controlling my known behavioral patterns, not for my capacity to adapt under extreme circumstances. While he explained his correction protocols for my privacy delusions, I quietly activated the cabin's emergency communication system using voice commands he'd taught me earlier. Within minutes, ship security was overriding Bridger's electronic locks and flooding our technological paradise. The investigation revealed Bridger had been running similar optimization experiments on multiple women through various dating apps, always with their unknowing consent buried in terms of service agreements for apps he'd created or acquired. As I write this from a different cabin with my own devices secured by the ship's cybersecurity team, Bridger is locked in the holding facility while federal authorities investigate what they're calling the most sophisticated domestic surveillance operation they've encountered. Technology was supposed to bring us closer together, but Bridger used it to turn love into a science experiment, where I was both the subject and the product. Every smart device that made our relationship more convenient was actually making me more controlled. The scariest part about modern relationships isn't just digital stalking. It's how easily surveillance can be disguised as care, how monitoring can masquerade as attention, and how algorithmic manipulation can feel like someone finally understanding you completely. When someone knows your patterns too well, when their romantic gestures feel automated rather than authentic, when they seem to predict your needs with computer-like accuracy. That might not be love. That might be someone who's replaced emotional connection with data collection. Real intimacy requires mystery, unpredictability, and the beautiful inefficiency of human emotion. The moment someone tries to optimize your love, they've already lost what made it worth having. Love letters scattered across our tiny cabin floor, and I was about to discover they were farewell notes. My name is Brinley, and the boy I'd loved since sophomore year chemistry class had been planning my death with the same careful attention he used to plan our first kiss. Weston proposed during graduation with a ring he'd saved for 2 years to buy, working double shifts at the funeral home while finishing his mortuary science degree. We couldn't afford much for our honeymoon, so when he found an incredible deal on an interior cabin, I didn't question the bargain price or the odd location on the ship's lowest passenger deck. "It's cozy," Weston said as we settled into our windowless room that was barely larger than a closet. Just you and me, no distractions. Like our own little world. Our tiny space had no natural light, no balcony, just a narrow bed, compact bathroom, and a small area where we could barely stand together without bumping into furniture. Most newlyweds would have felt claustrophobic, but Weston made it magical from the moment we closed the door. He'd scattered handwritten love notes throughout the cabin, tucked into my toiletry bag, taped to the bathroom mirror, hidden between the pages of the book I'd brought. Each note referenced a specific memory from our 6-year relationship, written in Weston's careful handwriting that I'd fallen in love with when he used to slip notes into my locker. Remember our first dance at junior prom when you stepped on my feet and laughed instead of apologizing? One note read, "That's when I knew you were perfect." Another, "You cried during Titanic even though you'd seen it 20 times. You have the most beautiful heart." As our playlist of shared memories filled the small space, songs from our first date, our prom, graduation, every milestone carefully curated. I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this man who'd loved me through acne, awkward teenage years, and all the uncertainty of growing up together. "How did you remember all these songs?" I asked, curled against him on our narrow bed as our song played softly from his phone. "I've been making this playlist for years," Weston said, stroking my hair. "Every time a song reminded me of you, I added it. Every moment that mattered, I saved it." But there was something unsettling about the way he said "saved it," like he was preserving specimens rather than cherishing memories. The cabin felt different at night. During the day, Weston's romantic touches made the small space feel intimate. But after midnight, the walls seemed to close in. Strange sounds echoed from below, mechanical humming, what sounded like metal doors closing, and occasionally, voices speaking in hushed, professional tones. "What's under us?" I asked Weston on our second night, after a particularly loud clang woke me from sleep. "Probably just ship machinery," he said. But his answer came too quickly, too prepared. Big ships have lots of mechanical systems running, 24/7. Weston's knowledge of the ship's layout was impressive for someone who'd never cruised before. He knew exactly where to find the quietest corridors, which elevators were less crowded, even which restrooms were cleanest. When I mentioned his familiarity with the ship, he laughed it off. "I researched everything online before we booked. I wanted our honeymoon to be perfect, so I studied deck plans, reviews, everything I could find." On our third day, while Weston went to what he called the gym, though I'd never known him to exercise, I decided to explore the ship alone. What I discovered made my newlywed bliss evaporate instantly. Our cabin wasn't just on the lowest passenger deck, it was directly above the ship's morgue. I found this out when I got lost trying to find the laundry and ended up in a restricted area where a crew member redirected me. When I mentioned our cabin number, her expression changed. "You're staying in 1247? She asked, looking concerned. "That's unusual for a honeymoon." "What do you mean?" "That cabin is directly above our medical facilities. Most passengers find it unsettling. The sounds, the energy. We usually reserve it for crew members or passengers who specifically request the cheapest available option." The sounds I'd been hearing weren't machinery. They were the ship's morgue operations. The professional voices, the metal doors, the late-night activity. Weston had booked us a cabin above where dead bodies were stored and processed. When I returned to our cabin, I found Weston organizing something in his suitcase, with the same methodical precision he used at work. His mortuary tools were laid out on our bed, scalpels, injection needles, embalming equipment that had no place on a honeymoon. "Why do you have your work tools?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Weston looked up with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, clinical, completely devoid of the warmth I'd known for 6 years. "Because I brought work with me." "I don't understand." Weston sat on the bed's edge, suddenly looking tired. Do you know why this cabin was so cheap, Brinley? Why it was the only deal I could find? I shook my head, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. Because it's where they put passengers who die during the cruise, before they're transferred to the morgue below. It's essentially a temporary holding room with a bed and bathroom for appearances. My hands started shaking. That's not possible. We're staying in a regular passenger cabin. We're staying in cabin 1247, which serves dual purposes. During normal cruises, it's rented as a budget interior room. During cruises where they expect incidents, it serves as overflow for the medical examiner's office. The love notes scattered around our cabin suddenly felt like evidence markers. The playlist of memories felt like a funeral soundtrack. Weston's romantic gestures felt like someone preparing a memorial service. Weston, you're scaring me. I chose this cabin specifically because I know this ship's layout. He continued with terrifying calm. I've worked on 3 previous cruise contracts as a consulting mortician. I know exactly how bodies are processed, how deaths are reported, how accidents are investigated. That's when I understood. Weston hadn't brought me on a honeymoon. He'd brought me to the perfect location for murder, equipped with professional knowledge and tools to cover his tracks. How long have you been planning this? I whispered. Since junior year, when you started talking about college applications out of state. You were going to leave me, Brinley. Everyone always leaves. Weston pulled out a notebook filled with detailed plans, timing charts, dosage calculations, disposal methods. He'd been studying how to kill me with the same dedication he'd once used to write me love letters. The notes, the playlist, the romantic setup. It's all for the investigation afterward. Evidence that we were happy, that we were in love, that your death was a tragic accident during our perfect honeymoon. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into the cabin's small chair. The boy who'd held my hand through high school heartbreaks, who'd waited for me to be ready for physical intimacy, who'd written me poetry and saved money for an engagement ring, had been methodically planning my murder for years. The cabin location isn't just convenient for body storage. Weston continued, his voice taking on the professional tone he used when discussing embalming procedures. It's also soundproof and isolated. No one will hear anything, and any noise will be attributed to the morgue operations below. Weston moved toward his tools, and I realized I had maybe minutes before he implemented whatever method he'd chosen. But here's what Weston hadn't considered. 6 years of loving someone means you also know their weaknesses. Weston was methodical, but not spontaneous. He planned everything in advance and became disoriented when plans changed unexpectedly. I'd seen it during school presentations, job interviews, even proposal planning. Any deviation from his script made him freeze. While Weston arranged his instruments with mortician precision, I started tearing up the love notes he'd scattered around the cabin, destroying the romantic crime scene he'd carefully constructed. "What are you doing?" Weston asked, his composure cracking as I ruined his planned narrative. "I'm destroying your story," I said, ripping up memories and scattering the pieces. "You're perfect evidence of our happy marriage. You're proof that this was an accident. I'm destroying all of it." Weston lunged for me, but I was already moving toward the cabin door, screaming for help in the narrow corridor. When ship security arrived, they found Weston surrounded by mortuary tools in a cabin filled with torn love letters, looking nothing like the grieving widower he'd planned to become. The investigation revealed Weston had been planning similar accidents for other women he'd dated, always choosing locations where his mortuary expertise would help him avoid suspicion. The love letters in our cabin weren't romantic gestures. They were props designed to establish motive for suicide if the accident scenario failed. As I write this from a secure cabin with security stationed outside, Weston is locked in the ship's holding facility. Our 6-year relationship is over. But the trauma of realizing someone can love you and plan to kill you simultaneously will take much longer to process. The most terrifying betrayal isn't discovering your partner has secrets. It's discovering they've been using your own love story as the blueprint for your destruction. Every memory we'd shared, every song that made me cry with happiness, every romantic gesture I'd treasured, had been weaponized against me. Weston didn't just plan to kill me. He planned to make my death look like the tragic end to a beautiful love story. He was going to murder me and then accept condolences for losing his beloved wife in a terrible accident. When someone you've trusted your entire adult life reveals they're capable of this level of deception and calculation, it destroys your ability to trust your own judgment. If I couldn't see the monster in the person I knew better than anyone else, how can I ever feel safe with anyone again? The scariest predators don't hide in the shadows. They sleep beside you for years, learning your patterns, your fears, your dreams, so they can use everything you've shared against you. They don't hunt strangers. They cultivate relationships specifically to create the perfect conditions for destruction. Love shouldn't feel like being preserved in formaldehyde. But some people see relationships as specimens to be collected, studied, and ultimately destroyed when they're no longer useful. Every gift came with invisible chains, and I was too dazzled by the luxury to notice the shackles forming around my wrists. My name is Ela, and what began as the most extravagant romantic gesture of my life became a horrifying realization that I was being prepared for sale like a prized commodity. Jasiel swept into my life during my lowest point. 3 months after losing my job, drowning in student debt, eating ramen for the 4th consecutive week. He was everything I thought I needed. Successful, generous, mature at 52 to my 24, with silver hair and designer suits that screamed stability and security. Our first date was at the city's most expensive restaurant, where Jasiel ordered wine that cost more than my monthly rent and insisted I choose the lobster despite my protests about the price. When I mentioned my financial struggles, he waved dismissively. Money is just a tool, darling. It's meaningless unless it's used to create beautiful experiences with beautiful people. Within weeks, Jasiel was paying my rent, clearing my credit card debt, and filling my closet with designer clothes I'd never dreamed of owning. Every gift came with reassurances that he expected nothing in return. He simply enjoyed spoiling someone who appreciated quality. After 2 months of this fairy tale existence, Jasiel announced he was taking me on a Mediterranean cruise. Not just any cruise. The owner's suite on the most luxurious ship in the fleet, with amenities that made 5-star hotels look modest. You deserve to see how the other half lives, Jasiel said, showing me photos of the suite that was larger than my apartment. I want to give you everything you've never had. The owner's suite was a floating palace. 3 bedrooms, a private dining room, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking endless ocean, and a wraparound balcony with a private hot tub. But what impressed me most was the personal butler service. A man named Quentin, who anticipated our every need with supernatural precision. Jasiel had thought of everything. Designer clothes were laid out each morning in my exact size, colors and styles I would have chosen myself. Gourmet meals appeared at perfect intervals, featuring cuisine from every port we'd visit. Even the toiletries in our marble bathroom were customized to my specific preferences. "How did you know I love lavender body wash?" I asked, marveling at products that must have cost hundreds of dollars. "I pay attention to details," Jasiel replied, kissing my forehead. "When you care about someone, you notice everything that makes them happy." But there was something unsettling about how perfectly everything matched my preferences. Preferences I didn't remember sharing with Jasiel, habits I thought only I knew about. The cruise itinerary was unusual. Instead of typical tourist destinations, we were visiting smaller ports in Eastern Europe and North Africa, places I'd never heard of that weren't listed in any travel guides. When I mentioned this to Jasiel, he explained we were taking a boutique route for sophisticated travelers who wanted authentic experiences away from crowds. "Mass tourism ruins places," he said dismissively. "We're seeing these destinations as they really are, not as tourist traps." On our third day, I noticed other passengers looking at me strangely. Women would stare with expressions ranging from pity to fear, while men examined me with calculating interest that made my skin crawl. When I mentioned this to Jasiel, he attributed it to jealousy. "You're young, beautiful, and clearly well cared for. Some people resent what they can't have." But their looks didn't feel like jealousy. They felt like recognition. Quentin, our butler, was increasingly present in ways that felt more like supervision than service. He appeared whenever I tried to explore the ship alone, always with a reasonable excuse, delivering fresh towels, adjusting the balcony furniture, bringing Jasiel a message. Gradually, I realized I was never truly alone, unless I was in our suite's bathroom with the door locked. On our fourth night, Jasiel suggested I try on a new dress he'd had specially made for our dinner at the captain's table. The dress was stunning, deep blue silk that fit like it had been designed specifically for my measurements. But when I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, I felt like I was seeing merchandise being prepared for display. "You look perfect," Jasiel said, his eyes examining me with the same calculating interest I'd seen from other passengers. "Absolutely perfect." That night at dinner, I was introduced to several other wealthy men traveling solo, all around Jasiel's age, all with young women who looked uncomfortable and overdressed. The women barely spoke, seemed afraid to eat without permission, and flinched when their companions touched them possessively. One woman, who couldn't have been older than 20, caught my eye during dessert. She mouthed a single word: "Run." When I asked Jasiel about the other couples later, he dismissed my concerns with practiced ease. Eastern European women often seem reserved. Cultural differences, language barriers. "You're overthinking things, darling." But I wasn't overthinking the fear in that woman's eyes, or the way she'd grabbed my wrist when I passed her table, pressing something small into my palm. Back in our suite, I examined what she'd given me. A tiny piece of paper with an address written in shaky handwriting, along with the words, "They sell us here." My blood turned to ice as I realized what I was looking at. The address was in our next port, a small city in Montenegro I'd never heard of. The woman had risked giving me information about where I was being taken. While Jasiel showered, I searched our suite frantically for more clues. Hidden in Jasiel's briefcase, I found documents that made my world collapse. Shipping manifests, payment records, and photographs of young women, including several photos of me taken without my knowledge over the past 2 months. The documents revealed the truth about our luxury cruise. This wasn't a romantic getaway. It was a transport operation. Jasiel wasn't my generous boyfriend. He was a trafficker who specialized in grooming vulnerable young women with debt and financial desperation. The designer clothes, gourmet meals, and luxury accommodations weren't gifts. They were investments in preparing valuable merchandise. The cruise was heading to Montenegro, where I would be sold to the highest bidder among the wealthy men I'd been introduced to at dinner. The owner's suite wasn't a romantic splurge. It was a holding facility designed to keep high-value cargo comfortable and compliant during transport. Every generous gesture, every expensive gift, every moment of luxury had been designed to make me emotionally dependent on Jaciel while physically preparing me for sale. The custom-fitted clothes were to showcase the merchandise. The specialized diet was to ensure optimal physical condition. The isolated suite was to prevent escape attempts or contact with anyone who might help. When Jaciel emerged from the bathroom, he found me holding the shipping documents. His expression went through several changes: surprise, annoyance, then cold calculation. "You shouldn't have found those," he said calmly, sitting on the bed like we were discussing dinner plans. "You're planning to sell me," I whispered, my voice barely working. "I'm planning to connect you with someone who will appreciate you properly. The men you met tonight are very wealthy, very discreet, and very interested in acquiring someone with your qualities." Jaciel spoke about human trafficking like a business transaction, which I realized it was to him. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was inventory he'd been developing for market. The debt relief, the clothes, the cruise, it was all preparation. "Investment in product development," Jaciel corrected matter-of-factly. "High-end clients expect quality goods in excellent condition. Everything I've provided has been designed to maximize your market value." He pulled out his phone and showed me more photos. Dozens of young women in luxury settings, all looking happy and well cared for, all with the same terrified look in their eyes I'd seen at dinner. "You're not my first acquisition, Isla. I've been perfecting this process for years. Identify financially vulnerable women, provide exactly what they need, create emotional dependency, then facilitate the transition to new ownership." The horror wasn't just that I was being sold. It was realizing how perfectly I'd been manipulated. Every vulnerable moment I'd shared with Jaciel, every tear about my financial struggles, every grateful reaction to his generosity had been calculated to make me the perfect victim. But Jaciel had made one crucial error. He'd assumed that gratitude would override survival instinct, that luxury would make me compliant, that emotional manipulation would prevent me from fighting back. While Jaciel explained the business model and his clients' expectations, I quietly activated the suite's emergency communication system hidden behind a decorative panel Quentin had shown me during our tour. Within minutes, ship security was breaking down our door. Jaciel tried to convince them I was having a mental breakdown, but the shipping documents and photographs told the complete story. The investigation revealed Jaciel had been operating a high-end trafficking ring for over 5 years, using luxury cruises to transport women to buyers across Eastern Europe and North Africa. The owner's suite was specifically designed for this purpose, with hidden cameras, soundproofing, and communication jammers. As I write this from a secure location under federal protection, Jaciel and his network are facing life sentences. The other women on the ship have been rescued, though many will need years of therapy to recover from their experiences. Luxury became my prison, generosity became my chains, and gratitude nearly became my death sentence. The most expensive gifts can come with the highest price: your freedom, your identity, your life. When someone's generosity feels too perfect, when their knowledge of your vulnerabilities seems impossibly accurate, when their gifts create dependence rather than independence, those aren't signs of love. Those are signs of someone investing in your destruction. Real love doesn't require you to be grateful for basic respect. Real love doesn't solve your problems only to create bigger ones. Real love doesn't treat you like property to be improved and eventually sold. The most dangerous predators don't look like monsters. They look like salvation when you're drowning, success when you're failing, security when you're vulnerable. They offer everything you've ever wanted, then demand everything you've ever been in return. Paradise isn't free. Someone always pays the price, and predators make sure it's never them. Best friends shouldn't have to save each other from their own boyfriends. But here we are. My name is Mavis, and what was supposed to be the perfect double-date cruise became a horrifying discovery that the men we trusted most had been treating us like objects they could share. The surprise came 3 weeks before spring break. My boyfriend Trey and my best friend Lena's boyfriend Yael announced they'd booked us all a Caribbean cruise, complete with connecting cabins, so we could have the best of both worlds, couple time and friend time. We thought it would be perfect, Trey explained, showing us photos of the adjacent balcony rooms. You girls can hang out whenever you want, but we each have our own space for privacy too. Lena and I squealed with excitement. We'd been best friends since middle school, had double-dated throughout high school and college, and the idea of a romantic getaway that didn't separate us felt like a dream come true. The connecting cabins were exactly as advertised. Identical ocean view rooms with a door between them that could be locked or unlocked from either side. Trey and I took the room closer to the elevator, while Lena and Yael settled into the one with a slightly better balcony view. On our first night, the guys surprised us with an elaborate romantic dinner setup in my and Trey's room. The connecting door was propped open, creating one large space decorated with candles, rose petals, and a table set for 4 with my favorite wine. A specific vintage I'd mentioned loving at a restaurant months ago. How did you remember the exact wine? I asked Trey, impressed by his attention to detail. I pay attention when it matters, he said, pulling out my chair with a flourish. Yael had prepared Lena's favorite dessert, and Trey had somehow arranged for the playlist that perfectly mixed both our favorite songs. The evening felt magical. Intimate enough for romance, but inclusive enough that neither Lena nor I felt like we were abandoning our friendship for our relationships. After dinner, we played cards and talked until almost 2 a.m., the wine making everything funnier and more relaxed than usual. When we finally decided to call it a night, Trey suggested we leave the connecting door unlocked. In case anyone needs anything during the night, he said casually. Plus, it'll be easier for breakfast tomorrow. Something about this felt unusual. Trey was typically very private about our bedroom activities, but I was too tired and wine-foggy to question it. Here's where everything started feeling wrong, though I didn't realize it immediately. I began waking up feeling more exhausted than when I'd gone to sleep, despite sleeping for 9 or 10 hours. My body felt strange, like I'd been more active during the night than I remembered. Sometimes I'd find my pajamas arranged differently than how I'd put them on, or discover I was wearing underwear I didn't remember changing into. When I mentioned this to Lena during our second day at the pool, she looked uncomfortable. I've been feeling weird too, she admitted. Like I'm not resting properly, even though I'm sleeping through the night. And Yael's been really enthusiastic in the mornings, talking about things we supposedly did that I don't really remember. We attributed it to the ship's motion, the unfamiliar bed, and the wine we'd been enjoying each evening. The guys were so attentive and romantic during the day that any weird feelings seemed ungrateful to mention. But the pattern continued. Every night, elaborate romantic setups with wine and dessert. Every morning, waking up exhausted and disoriented. Every day, Yael and Trey making references to intimate moments that felt hazy in our memories. On our 4th night, I decided to drink less wine to see if that helped with the morning confusion. While pretending to sip my glass, I actually poured most of it into the plant on our balcony when Trey wasn't looking. That night, instead of falling into my usual deep sleep, I found myself drifting in and out of consciousness. Around 2 a.m., I heard the connecting door open quietly. Through barely opened eyes, I watched Trey enter our room. But instead of coming to our bed, he moved toward the connecting door and whispered something. A few minutes later, Yael appeared in our doorway. The two men stood in the middle of our room, having a hushed conversation I couldn't quite make out. But I caught fragments. Your turn. She won't remember. Morning routine. My blood turned cold as I realized what I was witnessing. Trey left our room and went into Lena's, while Yael approached my bed. When Yael started touching me, I understood with horrifying clarity what had been happening every night. The guys had been drugging our wine, then swapping partners while we were unconscious. The enthusiastic mornings and hazy, intimate memories were the result of violations we couldn't remember because we'd been chemically incapacitated. I forced myself to remain limp and unresponsive while Yael assaulted me, knowing that revealing I was conscious could put both Lena and me in immediate danger. Instead, I mentally cataloged every detail for evidence while planning how to protect us both. The next morning, while the guys were at the gym, I told Lena everything. Her face went white as she realized her own hazy memories and physical discomfort made sense in this horrifying context. "We need to get off this ship," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We need evidence first," I said, though every instinct screamed to run immediately. "If we accuse them without proof, they'll just deny everything and possibly get violent." That night, we secretly recorded everything. Lena hid her phone under her pillow while I positioned mine to capture the connecting door area. We pretended to drink the wine while actually pouring it out, then feigned sleep while documenting our boyfriend's conspiracy to drug and assault us. The hair recordings were damning. Trey and Yael discussing their system, comparing notes about our bodies, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate us with romantic gestures and expensive wine. They talked about us like we were toys they could share, objects that existed for their entertainment and convenience. But the most sickening revelation was that this wasn't spontaneous. They'd been planning it for months. The connecting cabins, the romantic dinners, even asking us on the cruise together had all been preparation for their systematic violation of our consent and autonomy. When we confronted them the next morning with the recordings, their reactions were telling. Trey tried to gaslight us, claiming we were remembering wrong, and that we'd been enthusiastic participants who were now having regrets. Yael became aggressive, demanding we delete the recordings and threatening to make things difficult if we tried to report them. "You girls are overreacting," Trey said with disturbing calm. "We're all friends here. We were just having fun, sharing experiences. No one got hurt." "No one got hurt?" Lena screamed. "You drugged us and assaulted us while we were unconscious." "We're your boyfriends," Yael replied, as if that gave them ownership rights to our bodies. "It's not assault when we're in relationships." Their casual attitude toward what they'd done was almost as traumatic as the violations themselves. They genuinely believed that dating us gave them the right to drug us, share us, and use our bodies however they wanted without our knowledge or consent. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed our friendship wouldn't survive the trauma, that shame would keep us silent, that we'd be too humiliated to seek help. Instead, having each other made us stronger and more determined to get justice. While Trey and Yael tried to convince us to work things out privately. We were already implementing our escape plan. Lena contacted ship security while I sent our evidence to both our families and the authorities at our next port. The investigation revealed that Trey and Yael had been planning similar scenarios with other women, using cruise ships as isolated environments, where victims would be too far from help to escape or report crimes immediately. As I write this from a secure cabin with female security officers stationed outside, Trey and Yael are in custody facing multiple felony charges. Our friendship not only survived their attempt to destroy it, it became the weapon we used to fight back. The most devastating betrayal isn't discovering your partner cheated. It's discovering they never saw you as a person with autonomous rights over your own body. Trey didn't just violate my physical boundaries. He violated my trust, my sense of safety, and my belief that love means respect. When someone insists on situations that remove your ability to consent, excessive alcohol, isolated locations, circumstances where you can't remember clearly, those aren't romantic gestures. Those are predatory setups designed to exploit your vulnerability. Real love doesn't require unconsciousness. Real intimacy doesn't need drugs or deception. Real partners don't treat you like property to be shared or borrowed without permission. The connecting door between our cabins wasn't about convenience. It was about access. The romantic dinners weren't about love. They were about lowering our defenses. The best friend cruise wasn't about fun. It was about having witnesses who couldn't remember what they'd witnessed. Trust isn't just broken by strangers in dark alleys. It's shattered by boyfriends who see consent as an obstacle rather than a requirement, who view relationships as ownership agreements rather than partnerships based on mutual respect. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning to hurt you most. Celebrating life should never feel like a death sentence. But that's exactly what my boyfriend turned my cancer remission into. My name is Cecilia, and the man who held my hand through chemotherapy was secretly ensuring I'd need his hand to hold forever. The cruise was Alvin's idea, a celebration of my 6-month remission milestone. After 18 months of treatments, surgeries, and the constant fear that comes with fighting cancer at 28, the idea of a week at sea feeling healthy and free seemed like paradise. "You've been through hell," Alvin said when he showed me the booking confirmation. "You deserve to feel pampered and celebrated. I want to give you the trip of a lifetime." He'd chosen an accessible balcony suite, thoughtfully considering my ongoing mobility challenges from the treatments. The room had wider doorways, grab bars in the bathroom, and a shower seat, details that showed how much Alvin understood my needs and limitations. When we arrived at the suite, I nearly cried. Alvin had decorated it with photos from our 3-year relationship, pictures from before my diagnosis showing us hiking and traveling, images from during treatment showing his devotion as my primary caregiver, and recent photos documenting my recovery journey. "This is our love story," Alvin said, gesturing at the timeline of photographs. "Every struggle, every victory, every moment that brought us here." But looking at those photos now, I see something different. In every image from my treatment period, Alvin looks energized, purposeful, almost glowing with importance. In the recent recovery photos, he looks increasingly anxious and deflated, like something vital has been drained from his life. Alvin's attentiveness during the cruise was extraordinary, even by his usual caregiver standards. He monitored my medication schedule with military precision, prepared my supplements, and insisted on handling all my prescriptions personally. "You're still recovering," he'd say when I suggested I could manage my own pills. "Let me take care of you. That's what I'm here for." Every morning, Alvin would present my medications in a small dish with my favorite breakfast and coffee. The pills looked identical to what I'd been taking at home, but something felt different. Instead of the energy and appetite I'd been regaining in remission, I started feeling fatigued again. My stomach troubles returned, and I began experiencing the nausea that had plagued me during active treatment. "It's probably just the ship's motion," Alvin suggested when I mentioned feeling unwell. "Or maybe your body is still adjusting to being off the intense medications. Recovery isn't linear, remember." But Alvin seemed oddly energized by my declining health. The anxious, almost lost expression he'd worn for months disappeared, replaced by the focused intensity I remembered from my worst treatment days. He was attentive, protective, and essential again. Everything he'd been when I was truly sick. On our third day, while Alvin attended a wellness seminar, something he'd never shown interest in before my illness, I decided to examine my medications more closely. What I discovered made my remission-weakened hands tremble uncontrollably. The pills Alvin had been giving me weren't my usual supplements. Hidden behind the familiar labels were medications I didn't recognize, with side effects that matched exactly what I'd been experiencing: nausea, fatigue, decreased appetite, and what I was horrified to realize might be deliberately induced symptoms mimicking cancer recurrence. When I researched the unfamiliar medications using the ship's internet, my worst fears were confirmed. Alvin had been giving me drugs known to suppress immune function and cause symptoms that would require medical attention, possibly serious medical attention. But the most devastating discovery was Alvin's journal, left open on the desk in our accessible bathroom. Pages of entries documenting his emotional state throughout my treatment and recovery. Cecilia needed me completely today. Held her hair back, managed all her medications, made all her appointments. Never felt so important, so necessary. This is what love looks like. Then, more recently, Cecilia's energy is coming back. She's talking about going back to work, becoming independent again. I'm losing her to her recovery. She doesn't need me the way she used to. And finally, the entry that shattered everything. Started adjusting Cecilia's medication routine. Nothing dangerous, just enough to keep her dependent. She's happiest when I'm taking care of her anyway. This is better for both of us. Alvin had developed what I later learned is called caregiver addiction, a psychological condition where someone becomes emotionally dependent on being needed by a sick person. When I started recovering, Alvin couldn't handle losing his identity as my essential caregiver, so he decided to ensure I'd always need caregiving. He wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to keep me sick enough to need him forever. When Alvin returned from his seminar, he found me holding his journal with tears streaming down my face. "Cecilia, you shouldn't be reading my private thoughts," he said. But his tone was more annoyed than guilty. "You've been poisoning me," I whispered. "You've been making me sick on purpose." Alvin sat on our accessible bed with the patience of someone who'd been expecting this conversation. "I've been managing your health transition. Recovery is complicated, and you were moving too fast, pushing yourself too hard. I was getting better. I was finally getting my life back. Your life was better when I was caring for you," Alvin replied with frightening sincerity. "You were happier, more relaxed, less stressed about work and independence. I was giving you what you really needed." Here's the most chilling realization. Alvin genuinely believed he was helping me. In his mind, keeping me dependent and requiring care was protecting me from the stresses of healthy life, ensuring our relationship remained strong, and giving both of us the roles where we'd been happiest. The medications I've been giving you aren't dangerous, Alvin continued, like he was explaining medical treatment to a confused patient. They just maintain a baseline level of need. You get the care you deserve, I get to be the partner you need. Everyone wins. Everyone wins? I struggled to stand, my artificially induced weakness making the simple movement difficult. I win by being kept sick? By having my recovery stolen from me? Alvin's mask finally slipped, revealing something cold and possessive I'd never seen before. You were going to leave me eventually. Healthy people don't stay with their caregivers once they don't need caregiving anymore. I've seen it happen to other couples. That's when I understood the true horror. Alvin had been preparing for my recovery to end our relationship from the moment I was diagnosed. Every tender moment during my treatment, every sacrifice he'd made, every time he'd held me through the worst days, it was all investment in creating a dynamic he could control permanently. But Alvin had made a crucial error. He'd assumed that making me sick again would make me as helpless as I'd been during active treatment. Instead, it made me furious, with the strength that comes from having survived something worse than anything he could do to me. While Alvin explained his care management system, I activated the medical alert button in our accessible bathroom. Within minutes, the ship's medical team was testing my blood and discovering the unauthorized medications Alvin had been administering. The investigation revealed Alvin had been researching methods to induce controllable illness for months, joining online forums for caregivers and learning how to maintain someone in a dependent state without causing life-threatening harm. As I write this from the ship's medical facility under proper medical supervision, Alvin is in custody facing charges of medical abuse and assault. My blood work shows I'll recover fully once the drugs he was giving me clear my system. The most devastating betrayal wasn't that Alvin made me sick. It was realizing that every moment of care during my actual illness had been contaminated by his need to be needed. The gentle hand that helped me through chemotherapy was the same hand that poisoned my recovery. The love I thought had sustained me through cancer had actually been planning to sustain itself through my continued suffering. Recovery isn't just about healing from illness. It's about reclaiming your right to be healthy, independent, and free from people who benefit from your suffering. Some predators don't hunt the strong. They hunt the grateful, the dependent, the people who mistake control for care. Real love celebrates your strength, not your weakness. Real partners want you healthy and independent, not sick and dependent. Real caregivers help you recover completely, not just enough to still need them. When someone's identity becomes so wrapped up in your illness that your recovery threatens them, that's not love. That's addiction disguised as devotion. The most dangerous person in your life might be the one who seems most essential to your survival. Sometimes the hand that feeds you medicine is the same hand that keeps you sick enough to need feeding. Thank you for joining me on this journey through these terrifying tales. If these stories resonated with you, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, Mr. Nightvale, for more horror content that explores the darkness hiding in everyday situations. Remember, the scariest monsters often wear familiar faces.